It starts with an horrific surprise attack, then spreads like a tidal wave across vast stretches of ocean. Before it's over, the conflict in the Pacific launches an entirely new form of naval warfare and sends brave men into battle over crippling terrain. This is the epic story of terrifying fanaticism and personal heroism, told in compelling detail, with specially enhanced color film and rarely seen footage, often shot by the troops themselves. For the first time put together to answer the question, why did Japan's gamble to deliver a quick, decisive knockout blow fail? This is World War II in the Pacific. November 26th, 1941. North of Japan's Kuril Islands, a huge Japanese fleet sets off on a secret mission across the Pacific. Thousands of miles away, at the US naval base at Pearl Harbor on Hawaii, all is peaceful. Much of the US Pacific Fleet is in port. Under total radio silence, 6 Japanese aircraft carriers and over a dozen smaller warships are heading south on a collision course with destiny. 11 days later, the fleet is within striking distance of Hawaii. At Pearl Harbor, American troops are waking up to another beautiful day. Aboard the Japanese carriers, there's a last-minute briefing. Then a wave of over 180 warplanes takes off. An hour later, they're over Pearl Harbor. Five US warships are hit almost immediately. Within an hour, 2 US battleships are sinking, 2 capsize, and 2 more are badly damaged. US aircraft lined up on the island's airstrips are also hit. As news of the attack spreads across America, there's shock and horror. But there is also a question. Why has America been caught napping? The answer? Until recently, Japan and America have been friends. But with the Great Depression, Japan catches the same disease as Europe. Crazed nationalism. In Germany, Hitler grabs world attention as he seizes power. In Italy, Mussolini sings to the same nationalist tune. Now in Japan, a new militaristic regime vows to restore the country's greatness through force. In 1937, a ruthless Japanese war machine tears through China. Three years later, they expand their brutal actions with the invasion of the former French colonies of Cambodia, Vietnam, and Laos. It's a move that finally forces America to react. In the summer of 1941, the US freezes Japan's overseas financial assets and imposes an oil embargo. It hits Japan hard. The country receives 80% of its oil from America. Japanese diplomats travel to Washington to negotiate. Relations between the two countries are tense, but nobody in the US is expecting war. Then a new Japanese leader takes control. Hideki Tojo is an ambitious general and a fanatical nationalist. In the spring of 1941, 2.5 months after the US oil embargo, Tojo is appointed prime minister. His dream is a Japanese empire spanning Asia. Tojo isn't interested in negotiations with the US. He's secretly planning for war. He calculates that if he can knock out America's Pacific Fleet with a sudden, swift blow, US opposition will simply collapse. In early December 1941, the US War Department intercepts warnings of an imminent Japanese attack. But when it comes on the morning of December the 7th, American troops are caught completely by surprise. But if Japan believes she's delivered the knockout blow to US naval power in the region, she's wrong. On the morning of the bombing raid, the three most important ships in the Pacific Fleet, its aircraft carriers, are not in port. Missing them turns out to be a major Japanese mistake. Yet in the immediate aftermath of Pearl Harbor, America will be caught napping again and again. Ten hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japanese bombers suddenly appear over Clark Field in the Philippines. It's America's main airbase in Southeast Asia. It's followed by a second attack by Japanese Zero fighters. "45 minutes later, much of the US air power in the region has been destroyed. the Japanese have caught the US on the hop for a second time. In America, shock turns to outrage. "32 hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor, US President Franklin Roosevelt declares war on Japan.
Since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
But before America can organize its forces, there's yet another paralyzing Japanese strike. Within days of the air attack on the Philippines, thousands of Japanese ground forces swarm ashore. With no air power, US defenses are crippled. In a series of swift, ruthless assaults, the Japanese fan out across the country. Ten days later, the Philippine capital, Manila, is captured. For the US commander in the region, it's a humiliation. Douglas MacArthur is one of America's most decorated generals. But outnumbered and outgunned, there's nothing he can do. Finally, in early March, under orders from the American president, MacArthur flies out to Australia. The US regard him as too important to run the risk that he might be taken prisoner. MacArthur vows to return. But the Japanese have just bombed the northern Australian town of Darwin. It's an important Allied base in the Pacific. 8 ships have been sunk in the city's port, and a further 10 seriously damaged. 2 airfields have also been shot up, destroying aircraft and oil storage tanks and killing several hundred people. The raid has caused chaos to Allied supply lines. There are fears it may be followed by a Japanese invasion. MacArthur is swept up in the defense of the country. The Philippines will have to wait. An isolated and desperate group of Americans are left on the rocky Bataan Peninsula. They dig in and wait for help. Nothing comes. "We are the battling bastards of Bataan," they proclaim bitterly. No Papa, no Mama, no Uncle Sam. Facing repeated Japanese assaults with supplies running out, the US forces are up against impossible odds. After 4 months of savage fighting, 70,000 US troops and their Filipino allies surrender. Up to 10,000 of them will die on the Bataan Death March before they even reach Japanese prisoner of war camps. Throughout early 1942, the US and her allies suffer a series of massive defeats across the Pacific. Japanese troops occupy the British colony of Malaya. They spread out across the country. A month later, they overrun the capital, Kuala Lumpur. Allied forces withdraw to Singapore, the center of British rule in the Pacific. The British believe they've turned the island into an impregnable fortress. But all the guns point south, out to sea. The Japanese are approaching from the north. Britain sends 2 warships to attack Japanese troop convoys. They're met by Japanese bombers. Both ships are sunk in less than 2 hours. Almost 1,000 of their crew are lost. The British defenses in Singapore are soon reduced to chaos. A force of over 90,000 Allied troops surrender. Almost simultaneously, the British garrison in Hong Kong is invaded. It takes the Japanese just 2 weeks to overrun it. Hong Kong is followed by Burma. The country's defenses have been neglected. Within 2 months, the Japanese have seized the capital, Rangoon. 8 weeks later, Japan controls the whole country. Across the Pacific, the dominoes are falling. It's time for America and her allies to fight back. The big question, how? As US military planners study maps of Japan and the Pacific Ocean, one thing is crystal clear. Japan is protected by an enormously powerful navy. A seaborne assault so soon after the crippling attack on the US Pacific Fleet in Pearl Harbor would be suicidal. But an airborne attack is equally impossible. The nearest US base had been in the Philippines. Now the closest bases are in sites like the Hawaiian archipelago. These are over 3,000 miles from Japan, hundreds of miles further than the range of any US long-range bomber. Japan seems untouchable. Or is she? For weeks, a hand-picked group of pilots and their aircraft have been undergoing special training at the Eglin Air Base in Florida. The plan is to transport a small force of B-25 Mitchell bombers by aircraft carrier to within 400 miles of Japan. From there, they'll launch a bombing raid on Tokyo. The Mitchell is a compromise. It's neither the longest range nor most powerful US bomber. But it's big enough to carry a significant payload, and crucially, it's small enough to fit on a carrier. Still, it's an operation fraught with danger. Aircraft carriers are not designed to be used by bombers. Their flight decks are too short, and the bombers are too big and heavy. At the Florida Air Base, the Mitchells are stripped down to remove unnecessary weight. They're fitted with extra fuel tanks to increase their range. The pilots are put through an exhaustive and costly training program. Trials show the modified aircraft will just about be able to take off from the carrier deck, provided there are no errors. But there's a bigger problem. The Mitchells may be able to take off from a carrier, but the flight deck is too short for them to return and land. The only hope of getting back safely is to fly on to hastily improvised air bases along the Chinese coast. Even then, the Mitchells will be flying at the very limit of their range, possibly beyond it. It's a potential suicide mission. It needs someone special to command it. The man put in charge is one of America's most celebrated flyers. His name? Lieutenant Colonel James Doolittle, a man famous for his skill and daring in the air. He's the first man to fly across the United States in less than 24 hours. He's won trophies for speed and endurance flights. He's the first man to take off, fly, and land an aircraft using only instruments to guide him. But this will be Jimmy Doolittle's most challenging and dangerous mission yet. Four months after the devastating attack at Pearl Harbor, America is finally ready to strike back. The USS Hornet sets sail from San Francisco with 16 B-25 Mitchell bombers strapped to her deck. They're too big to be stored below. "12 days later, halfway across the Pacific, they link up with a second US carrier, the Enterprise, and an escort of cruisers and destroyers. On April the 17th, there's a small ceremony aboard Hornet. Japanese medals, donated to US servicemen during a state visit to Japan in 1908, are ceremonially strapped to one of the huge 500-pound bombs. The bombs are also daubed with slogans. One says, "You'll get a bang out of this." And another, "I don't want to set the world on fire, just Tokyo." "16 days after leaving the US, the Hornet is within striking distance of Japan. But then, there's an emergency. Radar operators on Enterprise locate 2 Japanese boats nearby. A message is flashed to the Hornet. 2 enemy surface craft reported. The Enterprise sends up reconnaissance aircraft to check on them. They find a small patrol boat, then a couple more. They appear to be part of a Japanese early warning system. The US warships open fire. Hundreds of shells target the Japanese boats. One sinks. But has word got out of the approaching US fleet? The Americans face a dilemma. Steam on and risk being trapped by the Japanese Navy, or launch their aircraft immediately, even though they're further from Japan than planned. The US commanders decide it's too risky to delay the attack. But it will mean Doolittle and his men, already flying at the limit of their range, will now have to fly even further. At 8 a.m., a message is flashed to Hornet. Launch planes. To Colonel Doolittle and gallant command, good luck and God bless you. At 8:20 a.m., the first B-25 takes off. Huge waves turn the carrier deck into a seesaw. The other aircraft follow at brief intervals. A man at the end of the deck watches the dips so the aircraft can take off on a rising deck. One of the most daring raids in aviation history is underway. Four hours later, the Doolittle Raiders are over Tokyo. The raid is over in a matter of minutes. Though the physical damage is minimal, the emotional damage to the Japanese people is profound. They've long believed their homeland to be invulnerable. Doolittle and his raiders prove it's not. Several hours later, the Americans are on course for the landing strips in China. None of them will make it. Over the China Sea, they run into a fuel-sapping headwind, which forces all to ditch. All but 7 of the 80 raiders will eventually make it home to safety, many helped by the local Chinese population. Back in America, they're given a hero's welcome. Doolittle is promoted to general and becomes a national hero. America, the sleeping giant, has shown its teeth. And the Doolittle raid is just the beginning. What the raid shows is that the Japanese gamble at Pearl Harbor has failed. America is finally ready to unleash a whole new form of naval warfare. One that will transform the war in the Pacific entirely. By late spring 1942, the US war machine has geared up. Civilian factories turn over to armaments. Aircraft production soars. Typewriter factories are converted to rifle production. And there's a dash to build aircraft carriers. US Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox speaks for many when he announces,
"The Japs started this war. We are going to finish it."
Tokyo's response to the April 1942 Doolittle raid is typically swift and thorough. Hideki Tojo, the Japanese Prime Minister, orders military planners to build a defensive ring of land bases around Japan's empire. The idea? To secure Japan's vital supplies of natural resources like oil. Half the ring is already in place. Japan controls most of the Chinese coast, Southeast Asia, and the Philippines. In early May 1942, to fill the gaps, she grabs the Solomon Islands. Two days later, a powerful Japanese fleet steams into the Coral Sea, hoping to capture Papua New Guinea. The naval commander in charge is perhaps Japan's greatest strategist. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto was the mastermind behind the attack on Pearl Harbor. He's Harvard educated. He understands America. At his disposal is perhaps the most powerful navy in the world. It includes 3 aircraft carriers, 9 cruisers, 15 destroyers, and dozens of support vessels. But Yamamoto is not the only top naval commander in the region. Facing him across the Coral Sea is one of America's finest admirals. Chester Nimitz is Commander-in-Chief of the US Navy in the region. Nimitz fought in World War I and is recognized as a brilliant tactician. He also leads a large fleet. It includes 2 aircraft carriers and an assortment of cruisers and destroyers. Some miraculously escaped the devastation at Pearl Harbor. Others have been rapidly patched up. As the 2 huge fleets approach each other, naval warfare is about to change forever. Traditional naval warfare has been a gun battle between warships, a clash of artillery at sea. It's almost always involved visual contact. But the centerpiece of the new fleets are aircraft carriers. They're armed with fighters and fighter bombers. It changes everything. Guns are purely defensive. Opposing carriers can be hundreds of miles apart. Fighting is done in the air. The new emphasis is on intelligence and logistics gathering. Finding out where the enemy is and getting your aircraft in the air before he can. For 2 days, the US and Japanese fleets send up aircraft to scout the Coral Sea. Neither knows what's out there or where the enemy is. Finally, US warplanes locate the Japanese carrier Shoho. Nimitz sends up dive bombers. £13,000 bombs demolish the Shoho's flight deck, exploding inside her hangars. Hours later, she will sink. The Battle of the Coral Sea has begun. The following day, Yamamoto strikes back. The Japanese locate the US carrier Lexington. Yamamoto sends up Zero fighters. The Lexington is soon damaged. Her smaller sister carrier, the Yorktown, is also hit. A bomb penetrates 4 decks before exploding. 37 men are killed. Meanwhile, US dive bombers locate Yamamoto's second carrier, the Shokaku. Her deck is so badly damaged, she can no longer be used by aircraft. As darkness falls, the Lexington is still afloat. But there's been an undetected fuel leak. Suddenly, she erupts. Amazingly, all but 215 of the nearly 3,000 men on board are rescued. Later that evening, she's scuttled by an American torpedo. The Battle of the Coral Sea is a stalemate. But for the first time, the US has taken on the powerful Japanese Navy and equaled it. The myth of Japanese invincibility is broken. It's time for America to drive home its advantage. And it's got just the weapon to do it. In Washington, Operation Magic is underway. A top-secret team of US codebreakers has successfully cracked the Japanese military codes. America has gained the upper hand in the crucial new front in modern warfare: intelligence gathering. In late May, Magic reports Japanese plans for a surprise attack on target AF. AF is clearly somewhere in the mid-Pacific. But where? Naval strategists scour maps of the region. One candidate is the coral atoll of Midway, an important US military base in the Hawaiian archipelago. It would be an ideal jumping-off point for a second and more decisive Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. To confirm their hunch, the US codebreakers set a trap. The American base on Midway is instructed to send an uncoded message reporting problems with its water desalination system. Almost immediately, naval intelligence intercepts a Japanese signal that target AF is experiencing water problems. The news is flashed to Nimitz. He now knows exactly where the Japanese will strike next. In early June 1942, the Japanese mount a diversionary attack on the Aleutian Islands off the coast of Alaska. The idea? To draw the US Pacific Fleet thousands of miles north, leaving the way clear to seize Midway in the south. But thanks to the codebreakers, Nimitz ignores the attack. The following day, Japanese carriers launch an attack on their real target, Midway. But the US base is prepared and sends up a strong force of fighters. It's not what the Japanese commander, Admiral Chichuchi Nagumo, is expecting. He needs to rethink his plans rapidly. Nagumo has kept a number of aircraft in reserve, loaded with bombs and torpedoes designed to attack ships. It's a precaution in case the US Navy shows up unexpectedly. But now Nagumo needs all his aircraft to drive home the attack on Midway. Carrier crews are ordered to reload the reserve aircraft with fragmentation bombs to continue the assault on the US base. But then, as the reloading is underway, Japanese spotter planes relay an urgent message. Three huge US aircraft carriers backed by warships are bearing down on them. Nagumo faces a tough choice. Should he continue the attack on Midway, or should he rearm his bombers to attack the US fleet? He hesitates. It's a fatal mistake. The US carriers launch dive bombers. With many aircraft still in the process of loading, the Japanese are sitting ducks. Within 5 extraordinary minutes, the American dive bombers reduce 3 of Japan's largest aircraft carriers to flaming wrecks. All will later sink. In reply, that afternoon the Japanese damage beyond repair the US carrier Yorktown. She too will sink. Meanwhile, America's bombers score a direct hit on a 4th Japanese carrier. She turns into a blazing pyre. For the Japanese, the attack on Midway is a disaster. Her navy has lost 4 of its finest carriers. It's also lost well over 2,000 sailors. A decisive moment. Months earlier, Japan had gambled all to push America out of the Pacific with a swift, decisive blow against the US Navy. The gamble has failed. The US now rules the waves. But the war in the Pacific is far from over. Japan is still undefeated on land and a powerful, threatening force in the air. The next few years of war will be devastating and deadly for both sides. Summer 1942. 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the tides of war are shifting. An American victory at Midway strips Japan of its dominance of the waves. But this epic war for supremacy in the Pacific is far from over. Hitting island after island, it's clear the US is facing an enemy that is willing to fight to the death. This is the story of terrifying fanaticism and personal heroism, told in compelling detail, with specially enhanced color film and rare footage shot by the troops themselves, all put together for the first time to answer the question, does America have what it takes to endure and win? This is World War II in the Pacific. By the summer of 1942, it's clear Japan's attempt at knocking America out at Pearl Harbor failed. In fact, the US victory at the Battle of Midway has enabled them to assert dominance at sea. It's a shift in power that has America ready to strike back at Japan's empire. The question is, where to begin? US military planners, led by Army Chief of Staff George C. Marshall, identified Japan's Achilles heel: a complete lack of natural resources. It's why Japan has seized all those territories around the Pacific. To create an empire to supply oil, rubber, tin, and food, essential for maintaining the war effort. Cut off these resources, and Japan will fall. The problem is, Japanese Commander General Hideki Tojo knows it too. He has built a defensive ring of steel around Japan's empire. A string of island bases, complete with troops, ships, and aircraft to protect Japan's supply lines. Taking them would demand more than American naval superiority. It will mean driving the Japanese from their bases across the ocean, island by island. This will require an entirely new form of warfare: the amphibious landing. America has never attempted anything like this before. But US chiefs believe there's no alternative to the island-hopping strategy. They decide to attack along two fronts. Admiral Chester Nimitz, the commander-in-chief of the US fleet, will seize key strategic Japanese bases in the Central Pacific, along the Gilbert, Marshall, and Mariana Islands. General Douglas MacArthur, the supreme commander of Allied forces in the Southwest Pacific, would take New Guinea and the Solomon Islands to the south of Japan's empire. Fortunately for MacArthur, Allies stationed on New Guinea have prevented Japan from seizing the entire island. The Japanese invaded New Guinea in March 1942, but came up against Australia's forces stationed there. With the help of the native Papuans, the Australians have fought back against Japan's South Seas forces and have retained an important base at Port Moresby. This will provide the US with a foothold from which to launch their offensive. MacArthur's first target, a tiny island on the southern tip of the Solomon Islands, the very bottom of Japan's defensive ring. Guadalcanal. The offensive opens with shelling by US warships. B-17s from 26th Squadron rained down destruction for 7 days. Only when Japan's defenses have been softened up does MacArthur launch the first land-based assault. US Marines go into amphibious combat for the very first time. Low light and heavy clouds allow the approaching landing craft to go undetected. Wave after wave of Marines pour onto the beaches. Everything is going like clockwork. But as they press up the beach, the Japanese are waiting. Japan's garrison fight back with shocking ferocity. The 1st and 11th Marine Corps pound the enemy defenses with howitzers. It's not enough. They are forced to get in close. The Japanese are driven by a code of honor. It's better to die in battle or commit suicide than surrender. A code that Americans quickly discover means they're in for a fight to the death. Within hours, 10,000 US troops reach land, outnumbering the enemy 5-1. As more US heavy artillery and tank support arrives, MacArthur's optimism grows that he has the Japanese outgunned and outnumbered. Japan's 2,000-strong garrison is quickly overwhelmed. By 8 p.m., after just 14 hours of fighting, American troops secure their main objective, an airstrip on the north of the island. MacArthur now has an airbase from which to support his advance on Japan's island empire. But his control over the island is far from secure. "12 days later, Japan mounts a counterattack. A wave of 1,000 soldiers from their nearby island stronghold of Rabaul lands on Guadalcanal. American forces stand firm. Almost all of the Japanese that attack are killed. But they keep on coming. Wave after wave of Japanese reinforcements pour onto the island. Fighting continues for 6 months. Until Japan is forced to concede. All remaining Japanese forces are evacuated from Guadalcanal by February the 7th, 1943. The battle for this one tiny island costs America 7,100 lives. Japan's losses are a staggering 24,000. Guadalcanal is a taste of the war of attrition that is to come. The American victory provides a key foothold on the edge of the Japanese Empire. A secure airfield for MacArthur to start island hopping his way towards the ultimate goal, mainland Japan. February 1943. With Guadalcanal under their control, US chiefs can now begin the process of cutting Japan off from its supply of natural resources. Rabaul, on the island of New Britain, is America's next target. From here, Japan provides air and naval support to its supply routes. MacArthur's plan is not to capture Rabaul, but to isolate it. Cut off, it will cease to pose any military threat. Operation Cartwheel is launched. General MacArthur intends to encircle Rabaul with a pincer maneuver. MacArthur himself will lead the western pincer from Port Moresby up the Japanese-occupied northern coast of New Guinea. The eastern pincer, commanded by Admiral William Bull Halsey, will start from Guadalcanal and move north through the Japanese-controlled Solomon Islands. From these 2 points, the US Navy can complete the encirclement. As with Guadalcanal, Cartwheel begins with intense aerial bombardment and shelling. Then Marine and Army units assault the beaches. This time, the Japanese unleash heavy mortar, sniper, and machine gun fire. As the US presses inland, Japanese resistance becomes even stronger. The enemy are well dug in, lurking in a network of pillboxes, caves, and underground bunkers. American forces have to get in close, a task for grenades and flamethrowers. Still, the Japanese soldiers stay true to the samurai code of honor. Rather than surrender, they mount suicide charges, shouting "Banzai." As the combat continues, US troops face a new enemy. The jungle terrain on the island is riddled with disease. Soldiers fall prey to dysentery, scrub typhus, and worst of all, malaria. In fact, across the entire war in the Pacific, malaria claims more American casualties than the Japanese. But despite the appalling jungle conditions, the US weight in numbers tips the balance. Japanese fanatical bravery is no match for America's military might. It takes 9 bloody months of conflict, but eventually the two pincers of Operation Cartwheel encircle Rabaul. American casualties run into the tens of thousands. Staggeringly, more than 150,000 Japanese are killed. Operation Cartwheel has done its job. Rabaul, along with its garrison of over 100,000 men, is now isolated and will play no further part in the war. Vital resources, including oil from the Dutch East Indies and rubber from New Guinea, are successfully cut off from mainland Japan. Meanwhile, to the east, Admiral Chester Nimitz and the US fleet are preparing to attack Japan's empire on a second front. Operation Galvanic aims to drive the Japanese off the Gilbert and Marshall Islands. These outposts provide vital military support to Japan's supply routes in the Central Pacific. The campaign's first target? The island of Tarawa. It starts with, by now, tried and tested tactics. A naval and air bombardment from the 5th Fleet. Then, the 2nd Marine Division heads for the beaches. This time, America's lack of experience of amphibious warfare shows when the troops land at low tide. They are forced to leave their landing crafts with water up to their waists and razor-sharp coral reefs underfoot. Exposed to enemy fire, hundreds of Marines are cut down by machine guns. Meanwhile, the bulk of Japan's 4,700-strong garrison is waiting inland. Outnumbered by the invading Americans 7-1. Every one of them is ready to die for their emperor. Their extreme dedication makes the next 4 days some of the fiercest and bloodiest battles in Marine Corps history. By the time the island of Tarawa is secure, 1,700 American lives are lost. Out of the entire Japanese garrison, only 17 allow themselves to be captured alive. With the Japanese unable to halt their charge, Nimitz's forces continue to steam north. By February the 22nd, he seizes all the key targets in the Gilbert and Marshall Islands. US forces now have their sights set to the north on the Japanese-controlled Mariana Islands. Admiral Chester Nimitz and his naval task force launch Operation Forager. The first target, the Mariana Island of Saipan. A 165,000 shells are fired at Japan's defenses. Two days later, the amphibious landings begin. "8,000 Marines of the 2nd and 4th Divisions are ashore by early morning. The fighting follows a by now familiar pattern. But this time, the Japanese have a surprise. They don't just have ground troops. They call up their navy. A huge carrier fleet, including 5 fleet carriers and 4 light carriers, advances into the Philippine Sea. The aim is to cut the US troops on Saipan off from their supporting ships. But there is a flaw in the Japanese plan. Most of their experienced pilots were lost at the Battle of Midway. These pilots are rookies. A first wave of just 61 Zero fighters take off. Nimitz scrambles 220 F-6F Hellcat fighters. These are America's most advanced fighter planes. Their pilots are battle-hardened. It's men against boys. Outnumbered and outgunned, Japan's Zeros are mercilessly blasted from the sky. The Japanese launch another wave of 120 aircraft. And then another 47. By nightfall, the US losses stand at just 29 planes. Japan's are almost 400 aircraft. It goes down in history as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. At sea level, the battle is just as one-sided. US submarines torpedo and sink 2 Japanese aircraft carriers. In less than 24 hours, the Imperial Japanese fleet is routed. They lose 3 carriers and almost 600 aircraft. This crushing blow means that Japan can no longer compete in carrier-based warfare. The Battle of the Philippine Sea is an important American victory. Back on Saipan, the conflict plummets to new depths of horror. It's not the Banzai charges that shock the US troops. It's the suicidal fanaticism of the 8,000 Japanese civilians on the island. American soldiers watch in horror as men, women, and even children jump from cliffs to their death. The message to America is clear. To beat Japan, the US won't just have to overcome a vast army, but an entire nation that will never surrender. How can you defeat an enemy that just won't back down? Summer 1944, and America is winning the war in the Pacific. Japan's empire is being rolled back, but the cost of human life is horrifying. US losses stand at around 46,000 men. Japan's are massive, at over 300,000. Mainland Japan is deprived of natural resources, and their war effort is taking a toll on the Japanese people. Food is in short supply. Japan's agricultural and transport infrastructures are disintegrating. But the war seems no nearer to ending. In the US High Command, an argument is underway. Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Ernest J. King argues that the war could be brought to a swift end by moving the fleet west from the Marianas to the island of Formosa, modern-day Taiwan. It would put Japan's home islands within easy striking range of US heavy bombers. King's plan would mean bypassing most of the remaining Japanese bases across the Pacific, leaving them undefeated but isolated. General MacArthur has other ideas. The US Supreme Commander in Southeast Asia tells President Roosevelt that America must continue with his island-hopping strategy. In particular, he must drive the Japanese off the Philippines. This approach, he argues, would provide bigger bases than Formosa from which to launch bombing raids, and consolidate America's stranglehold on Japan. There's something else. MacArthur had promised the Filipino people that he would return when he was driven off the island in December 1941. He means to keep that promise. On July 26, 1944, President Roosevelt backs MacArthur's plan. It is a decision that will prove fateful for hundreds of thousands of people. As preparations for the campaign begin, MacArthur deliberates where to make his first assault. He targets the island of Leyte in the southern Philippines. The general launches amphibious landings. An expert in PR, he is filmed striding ashore with his troops, showing the folks back home that he has indeed returned. By now, America is accomplished at amphibious landings, and within hours, the 6th Army establishes an 18-mile-long beachhead from which to begin their advance inland. The Japanese High Command know they have to try something different to break the cycle of American success. They gamble and mobilize all their remaining major naval vessels. They call it Operation Sho, meaning victory. The plan is to lure America's naval support away from the ground troops on Leyte. The Imperial fleet is split into 3. One convoy advances through the San Bernardino Straits to the north, and another through the Surigao Straits to the south. The 3rd Japanese convoy, including the Imperial Navy's last 4 carriers, approaches the Philippines from the northeast. On October the 23rd, the northern convoy of Operation Sho is spotted. Admiral Halsey, commander of the 3rd Fleet, intercepts. The following morning, he scrambles aircraft to attack the Japanese convoy. The Japanese come under fire. But then turn and retreat. It's a trick designed to lead Halsey on. He takes the bait, heading straight towards the Japanese carriers to the northeast and away from Leyte. Meanwhile, to the south, Admiral Kincaid heads out to intercept the 2nd Japanese convoy approaching through the Surigao Straits. Japan's plan is working. Just a few US vessels remain to support the landing on Leyte. Now, under the cover of darkness, the Japanese fleet that had appeared to retreat turns back to attack the handful of American ships still covering the landing. This could be the victory that Japan so desperately needs. But at the last moment, they lose their nerve. Fearing they are sailing into a trap, the Japanese turn again and retreat. The opportunity is lost. In the Surigao Straits, Admiral Kinkaid and the US 7th Fleet unleash hell on Japan's southern convoy. Three Japanese destroyers and 2 battleships are sunk. To the northeast, Admiral Halsey and the 3rd Fleet reach the 4 remaining Japanese carriers. Having lost most of their aircraft and pilots in the Marianas, Japan's carriers are sitting ducks. All 4 are sunk. It should be the final knockout blow against the Japanese Imperial Navy. But Japan believes it can still strike back against the US fleet. With a terrifying tactic that takes its fanaticism to a whole new level. The Imperial High Command calls for volunteers to form a new aerial strike force. They are called kamikaze, meaning divine wind. And they are required to make the ultimate sacrifice in the name of their emperor. In the fall of 1944, the first kamikaze pilots drink sake before climbing into their aircraft laden with fuel and explosives. Their targets are America's aircraft carriers, supporting the troops on the Philippine island of Leyte. US fighters and anti-aircraft guns respond to the threat. Some kamikazes are blown out of the sky. Others miss their targets. But a direct hit is devastating. The carrier St. Lo is sunk, killing 100 Americans. As horrific as these attacks are, they're not enough to turn the tide of the war. Out of some 2,600 kamikaze sorties, only 19% hit their targets, sinking less than 40 US ships. Back on Leyte, ground forces face off against Japanese defenses across the island. Attritional warfare continues for 2 solid months. But once again, Japan's determination is no match for America's sheer weight in numbers. They are outnumbered 4-1. On New Year's Eve 1944, General MacArthur's men finally capture Leyte. Almost the entire Japanese force of 50,000 lies dead. Now MacArthur can launch his attack on the main Philippine island of Luzon. Early in the new year, over 100,000 troops of the 6th Army Division land on the south coast of the island. The landings are relatively unopposed. The Japanese garrison is poorly equipped and is no longer receiving air and naval support or reinforcements from Japan. No match for America. They are forced to fall back to mountain strongholds. As US reinforcements pour onto Luzon, MacArthur heads straight for the capital, Manila. After just 2 weeks of close-quarter combat, MacArthur's troops are just 60 kilometers from the capital. They retake the major US airbase of Clark Field that had fallen to Japan in 1941. With Manila in his sights, it looks as if General Douglas MacArthur is about to make good on his promise to liberate the Philippines. The 1st Cavalry Division take the bridge over the Tulahan River. And on February the 3rd, the US enter the capital city, Manila. The Japanese hold Manila's historic architecture in high esteem. To preserve it, General Yamashita gives orders to withdraw completely. But a garrison commander named Sanji Iwabuki defies the order along with 20,000 men. They swear to uphold the Japanese Imperial Code of Honor and defend the city to the death. The battle for Manila becomes the first and fiercest example of urban warfare in the Pacific Theater. American soldiers inch through the capital. They face snipers, machine gun nests, and hidden artillery. Historic Manila is reduced to rubble. After a month of fighting, US forces drive Iwabuki and his remaining troops to the historic center of the city known as Intramuros. There, they will make their last stand. American soldiers unleash a 140-gun artillery barrage. US troops then assault the stronghold. The battle is brutal, lasting 3 days. At dawn on the 26th, Iwabuki and his officers commit seppuku, the Japanese act of ceremonial suicide. The battle for Manila is finally over by March the 3rd. American losses stand at 1,000. Japan's at 17,000. But over 100,000 Filipino civilians lie dead, many of them massacred by the Japanese. It is the highest death toll of any battle in the Pacific theater so far. MacArthur has kept his promise, but at a devastating price. The battle for the Philippines will continue for 5 more months, as the US are made to weed out pockets of Japanese defenders dotted around the islands. When it's finally over, it has cost America around 14,000 dead and almost 50,000 wounded. Japan has lost almost 350,000 soldiers' lives. Strategically, the campaign has been a success. Japan's navy has been crushed. Its last supply lines to sources of oil and food have been severed. But everyone knows the war is far from over. The Japanese believe they can still win. If they can make the fighting brutal enough and just fight on whatever the cost, they are convinced that America will not have the stomach to continue. US chiefs know this too. They need to find a way to force Japan to surrender quickly and unconditionally. But how? Victory in the Pacific is on the horizon, but not fast enough for the thousands of American servicemen facing a suicidal enemy. To end the epic war in the Pacific, it will take the most destructive form of warfare ever invented. This is the story of terrifying fanaticism and personal heroism, told in compelling detail, with specially enhanced color film and rare footage, shot by the troops themselves. Put together for the first time to answer the question, why did Japan believe America would never deliver the knockout blow? This is World War II in the Pacific. Two and a half years after Pearl Harbor, it's finally payback time. A campaign to rule the waves and island hopping to seize back territory has given the American forces the upper hand in the Pacific. But not for a second does anyone believe Japan is ready to give in. The way the Japanese soldier fights is terrifying. Surrender is unthinkable. Forcing Japan to do that is going to be bloody and bitter. In Europe, US soldiers know they can overcome their enemy in conventional battle. For them, by the summer of 1944, the end is in sight. In the Pacific, bitter experience tells them otherwise. The soldiers have had to develop violent new weapons and tactics to match the barbarity of their enemy. They resort to flamethrowers, artillery, and tanks. For every inch of terrain, the Japanese exact a cruel toll. General George C. Marshall, Chief of Staff of the US Army, fears defeating Japan can only come at a horrific cost in American lives. Desperate to avoid this, he and his colleagues, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, devise a plan. A simple, two-pronged strategy. 1, blockade and starve the Japanese people. 2, bomb their factories and obliterate their capacity to wage war. Together, the hope is they can destroy Japan's will to fight on. Phase 1 begins. US submarines operating out of the Philippines and aircraft from US carriers blockade Japan, severing vital supply lines. Raw materials, food supplies, and troop ships are dispatched to the bottom of the ocean. The result? Throughout 1944, Japan loses 300,000 tons of shipping each month. Food stocks plummet, millions go hungry, and a famine looms. But the Japanese people stand firm. Time for Phase 2 to kick in. Destroy Japan's war machine from the air. It's a chance for one man to make his mark. Curtis LeMay, is a cigar-chomping, battle-seasoned Major General in the US Army Air Force's 20 Group in China. He's a tough-talking champion of carpet-bombing Japan into submission. He and his superiors propose a terrifying assault from the sky, an unprecedented air war that will flatten Japan's factories. The challenges LeMay faces are huge. Distances in the region are massive. Japan is over 1,500 miles away from the nearest airstrips, and heavy bombers cannot fly from carriers. But LeMay believes he has the right machine to get the job done. The brand new Boeing B-29 Superfortress. The result of a $3 billion development program. A state-of-the-art 4-engine bomber, it can fly all the way to Japan thanks to its massive range of nearly 4,000 miles. This means it can operate out of airstrips in China and on the Mariana Islands. Chengdu, China. 62 US B-29s take off. Their target, the Yawata Steelworks in central Japan. The distance is so great, the Superforts must fly unprotected, without fighter escort. This forces the bombers to fly at high altitude, where the Japanese fighters will have difficulty reaching them. Each B-29 will drop its payload of 8 500-pound high-explosive bombs from 30,000 feet. The goal? Flatten the steelworks. But the attacks are from so high up, they miss their target. Japan's strong jet stream winds blow the bombs off course. A disappointing debut for the multi-billion-dollar airplane. The B-29's accuracy does not improve with additional raids in the weeks ahead. The grand plan to force Japan to surrender is not working. Curtis LeMay is promoted to take personal charge of the campaign. His answer is to bomb more and bomb harder, so he devises a new tactic, the firestorm. LeMay decides to use a horrifying new weapon, the M69 incendiary cluster bomb. Accuracy is not essential. The incendiaries use napalm to burn whole swathes of a city. Any weapons factories in the area will be destroyed in the inferno. Bombers based in the Mariana Islands set their sights on Japan's 6th largest city, Kobe. In their bomb bays are tons of incendiary bombs. Kobe burns with a ferocity never before seen. The city is densely packed and made up of wooden and paper houses that explode into flames. whole neighborhoods are incinerated. Thousands die. The orange glow can be seen hundreds of miles away. LeMay does it again. He hits 67 cities, including the capital Tokyo, in the weeks ahead. Still, the Japanese won't buckle. Worse, they are beginning to hit back. Fighters and anti-aircraft guns start downing B-29s. LeMay's aircrews are suffering mounting losses, with nearly 3,000 airmen killed. Morale is sinking. LeMay remains convinced that carpet bombing can work. But to succeed, he believes a change in tactics is in order. The B-29s must fly lower to improve accuracy. That means fighter escorts are essential. To achieve that, the fighters need bases closer to mainland Japan, on enemy-held territory. LeMay and the US battle planners have one island in mind: Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima is the most outlying of Japan's home islands, just a tiny lump of volcanic rock, barely 5 miles long. Located 660 miles from Japan's main population centers, Iwo Jima has 2 airstrips that are ideal for fighters like the P-51 Mustang. Controlling it would mean Curtis LeMay's B-29s could fly with a fighter escort all the way to their targets and back. But since early 1944, the Japanese have been firmly dug in on Iwo Jima. The defense is masterminded by Japanese General Tadamichi Kurabayashi. He was military attaché in Washington in the 1920s. He knows what to expect from the Americans. His 21,000 men are making the tiny island into a fortress. They have dug tunnels, bunkers, and defensive lines away from the beaches. They believe they are ready for anything the Americans can throw at them. In February 1945, the largest fleet so far assembled in the Pacific arrives in the waters off Iwo Jima. It boasts over 400 ships. Aboard the troop carriers, 60,000 Marines of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Divisions are awaiting the green light. In charge of the landings is Marine Corps General and Commander of 5th Amphibious Group, Harry Schmidt, known to his men as the Dutchman. To crush all resistance, for 75 days the island is pummeled with a massive bombardment. Wave after wave of carrier-borne aircraft and medium bombers hit the Japanese positions. Then, the big guns of the fleet open up. This is the climax of one of the most prolonged and concerted bombardments of the war. Intelligence suggests the island should fall in just a week. The first wave of landing craft set off. On board are 8,000 Marines. As the Marines hit the beach, there's nothing, no reply from the Japanese. It seems the bombardment has worked. Then, the Japanese defenders had been hiding underground during the bombardment. Now they burst out, inflicting heavy casualties. Over 500 Marines die on the beaches. As the hours pass, the Marines recover and gradually push inland. By the end of the day, 30,000 Marines are ashore. Over the next 3 days, the fighting is intense as the Marines battle their way to the island's most visible landmark, the 550-foot volcano, Mount Suribachi. The volcano dominates the island. From there, the Japanese can fire on any targets below, including the all-important airfields. It's just a quarter of a mile from the beaches, but the Marines must fight their way up the steep mountainsides. On February the 23rd, the most iconic moment of any war is captured as Marines raise the stars and stripes on Mount Suribachi. A different group of men are the first to raise a flag. But it is restaged later for the benefit of a photographer, Joe Rosenthal. He creates the image that will come to immortalize the Pacific War. It's an unforgettable scene, but it's not the end of the battle. Combat continues for another 21 days because the Japanese refuse to surrender. Marines fan out across the island, fend off any final suicidal banzai charges, and burn out the last of the island's defenders. 36 days after it all began, Iwo Jima is secure. The Americans have the staging post they so badly want for their air war. But the cost is terrible. "6,821 Marines are killed, 18,000 wounded, capturing a tiny island just 5 miles long. Total casualties are proportionally worse than for D-Day. 27 Medals of Honor are won. Iwo Jima accounts for 28% of all the Marine Corps awards granted in the whole of the Pacific Campaign. If anyone doubts the Japanese resolve, their losses prove the point. Only 200 of the original 21,000 defenders survive. The rest prefer to die. It shows exactly what the Americans are up against. The air war now enters a new terrifying phase. 18 days after the first landings on Iwo Jima, Curtis LeMay switches to an all-out aerial firebombing campaign. In one of the most destructive night raids in all history, Operation Meeting House, over 300 B-29s hit Tokyo. They lay waste to 16 square miles of the city. A 100,000 Japanese citizens are incinerated, 1 million made homeless. The cities of Nagoya, Osaka, and Kobe are all razed to the ground. Every month, LeMay receives another 100 B-29s from Boeing's factories to join the campaign. In total, his airplanes will drop 170,000 tons of bombs. Up to 500 bombers take part in each raid. Now they fly at night and at low altitude, 6,000 to 9,000 feet. LeMay orders that guns and unnecessary equipment be stripped from the B-29s so they can carry yet more ordnance. And it doesn't end there. US aircraft can start roaming over Japan, shooting and strafing targets at will. Despite all this, the Japanese people show no signs of buckling. The inescapable truth is that LeMay's bombing is not working. A ground invasion and the horrific number of casualties that will come with it is looking unavoidable. By spring 1945, American battle planners in the Pacific are terrified by the prospect of conducting more land invasions. But to win the war, it's a must. Hundreds of so-called home islands make up the Japanese nation. At their center are Japan's main population areas, the 4 islands of Honshu, Hokkaido, Kyushu, and Shikoku. Before they can capture these, America needs more staging areas close to the mainland. First in line, Okinawa, 340 miles to the south of the Japanese mainland. On Okinawa, 100,000 men are waiting for the American ground troops. Backing them are hundreds of pilots schooled in the Bushido Code of Death instead of defeat. The US assembles a huge task force. However, before American boots set foot on the island, the Japanese strike first. Wave after wave of kamikaze converted fighters hit the invasion fleet backed up by conventional bombers. Several carriers are hit, others seriously damaged. Losses are even worse among the destroyers manning the outer defense lines. Despite the damage, the US invasion goes ahead. It starts as usual. First, the heavy bombardment. Then, the land assault begins. Army units attack the south and Marine units the north in an attempt to cut the island in two. Again, the landing is strangely quiet. Japanese Commander Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima has withdrawn to a system of elaborately fortified defenses called the Shuri Line. The army units in the south quickly discover what that means. Grunts have to inch forward through the Shuri Line. Each time a strong point is taken, the Japanese defenders fall back to pre-prepared positions where the bloody process begins again. The task force anchored at sea isn't spared. The suicide campaign continues. On the 7th of April, 700 kamikaze set off on a one-way mission. They hit the ships anchored off Okinawa. One destroyer survives 6 kamikaze attacks and 4 bomb hits. 4 other ships aren't so lucky and are sunk. 24 are damaged at a cost of 335 Japanese aircraft. The Japanese High Command is even prepared to sacrifice the pride of its fleet on a desperate last-ditch mission. The Yamato is the world's biggest and most powerful battleship at 72,000 tons. It is sent on a final sortie to devastate the US fleet at Okinawa. It is spotted en route. 400 American fighters are scrambled. Yamato is blown to bits. On Okinawa, fighting grinds on. Marines and GIs become locked in deadly hand-to-hand battles. "30 days in, momentous news reaches them amidst the mayhem. Adolf Hitler commits suicide. A week later, the war in Europe is over. But while the rest of the world rejoices, for the Leathernecks and GIs fighting on Okinawa, it means little. Some unit commanders can only give their men a 5-minute break before grimly ordering them on. The battle for Okinawa rages on into a second, then a third month, as the Americans struggle to overcome the Japanese defenses. Every cave conceals an ambush. Each tree line hides a new bunker. American forces throw everything at the Japanese. With total air supremacy, US fighter bombers take on a specialist ground support role. Troops work side by side with forward air controllers. Together, they identify targets and call in fighters. If the aircraft can't silence the most stubborn resistance, flame-throwing tanks or demolition charges are brought in. Even so, it's only when the main city of Shuri is captured and the Marines launch a new offensive that the island finally falls. It has taken 82 days. $7,503 US troops pay for Okinawa with their lives. Nearly 37,000 are wounded. 5,000 sailors are killed, a massive cost in American life. For Japan, the losses are even worse. 100,000 Japanese soldiers are dead. Only 7,000 surrender. These horrific losses make it crystal clear to the American generals that taking mainland Japan will mean the mother of all battles. Meanwhile, Japan is preparing for the final fight to the death. Hundreds of new kamikaze pilots are awaiting their chance to die for the Emperor. 375,000 soldiers are gathered to repel the Americans. Militias and suicide volunteers are ready and waiting. In the air, a reserve of 5,000 aircraft has been held back. Their best tanks have been preserved for the final battle. Even after they've been hit by hundreds of thousands of tons of bombs, Japan's military leadership refuses to contemplate surrender. Despite their best efforts to avoid it, the American strategists are faced with one grim reality: the need to invade Japan. It is now clear what the Japanese tactic is. If they can make it bloody enough, they believe that America will not have the stomach for a fight. When pushed to estimate eventual casualty numbers, US battle planners say it will cost 250,000 American lives. A figure that's unacceptable. They have to find another way. There is one other solution, and it offers US President Harry S. Truman an alternative to a ground invasion.
At the Emperor's Palace in Potsdam to pose for the international press come United States President Harry S. Truman, Russia's Generalissimo Joseph Stalin, and Winston Churchill as Britain's Prime Minister.
President Truman is in Europe. At the Potsdam Conference, the Allied leaders meet. News filters through to him of a development in a top-secret weapons program. One day earlier, at the White Sands Proving Ground in New Mexico, the first successful atomic test in history took place. It is called Trinity.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, now.
It's the dawn of the nuclear age. The Manhattan Project is a 3-year-old program to devise a weapon so grotesquely powerful, it might just force the Japanese to cave in. Its mastermind is Robert Oppenheimer. The result, the nuclear bomb. It involves splitting atoms to release huge amounts of explosive energy. Oppenheimer and his team have developed 2 types of bomb. One uses naturally occurring uranium, the other, even more powerful, man-made plutonium. President Truman hints to Soviet leader Joseph Stalin that a powerful new weapon is ready. Stalin appears strangely unsurprised. Truman is puzzled by his reaction, but later learns Russian spies penetrated the Trinity project. From Potsdam, an ultimatum is issued to the Japanese: surrender or face destruction. Japan does not respond. The Prime Minister has been ordered to maintain mokusatsu, meaning in Japanese, to kill by silent contempt. After agonizing over the decision, President Truman gives the go-ahead. A few days later, the crew of a B-29 named Enola Gay, after the Captain Paul Tippett's mother, takes off from their airbase in Tinian in the northern Mariana Islands. In the plane's belly is a 15-kiloton uranium bomb, nicknamed Little Boy. Their target, Hiroshima, in western Japan. It takes the Enola Gay and its deadly cargo 6 hours to fly to Hiroshima, 500 miles from the capital, Tokyo. The weather over Hiroshima is clear and crisp. The crew circle overhead. Then at 8:15 a.m., an explosion with the power of nearly 15,000 tons of TNT is detonated over the city. For the victims, death comes in stages. First, the Earth under Ground Zero is heated to 5,000 degrees. Then comes the shockwave. Next, a deadly firestorm sucks oxygen out from the atmosphere, killing more people. Finally, others will succumb to radiation poisoning, which arrives as black radioactive rain. The devastation for just one bomb is astonishing. Some 70,000 people are killed. President Truman announces the weapon to the world and promises more atom bombs unless Japan surrenders.
If they do not now accept our terms, they may expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth.
The Japanese ignore him. Again, they choose to not even respond to his ultimatum. Three days later, a plutonium-based bomb, even more powerful than the last, and known as Fat Man, is loaded onto another B-29. The target, Nagasaki, 760 miles to the south of Tokyo. The blast at Nagasaki is just as lethal. Up to 50,000 people die. Still, there is no response from the Japanese leadership. The Americans face a problem. They have no more atomic bombs. Making more will take time. So US battleships sail right up to Japan's coast and pour fire onto targets inland. Marauding fighters continue to shoot up anything and everything they can find. Finally, the Japanese War Council gathers to contemplate the unthinkable. The ultimatum for surrender offered at Potsdam. They agree to accept, but with conditions. Japan's offer is immediately rejected. Truman is very clear. Only unconditional surrender will do. against all expectations, the Japanese give ground again. Only one overriding condition remains. Their emperor must be allowed to stay in power. The Americans signal that if the Supreme Commander of Allied Forces, General Douglas MacArthur, is placed in overall command of Japan, they will allow the emperor to stay. The two sides finally agree terms of surrender in early August. On the quarterdeck of the battleship USS Missouri, the Japanese delegation, including Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu, signed the formal document of surrender. Finally, it's over. Peace has arrived. Countless lives have been lost in one of the most bloody campaigns of World War II. It's seen the arrival of new and frightening weapons and tactics, including the ultimate game changer in the atom bomb. In the end, it is a catastrophe for the Japanese. The cost for them is 2 million lives, of which 1.74 million are military. The American nation has fought for 4 years and buried nearly 500,000 men. In the Pacific, 55,145 men were lost from the Army, 29,263 from the Navy, and 19,163 Marines. But out of all this, new adversaries emerge in an epic struggle to master such devastating power. While the Japanese nation must rebuild its shattered and scarred country and learn to come to terms with a calamitous war that began in the waters of Hawaii and ended in rubble and ash.